Hello, hello, and welcome again to A Beatles Show, a podcast that we call Things We Said Today. This is a talk show in which we talk about anything concerning the Beatles, anything about their past, their history, or possibly things going on in the news today. I'm Ken Michaels. I'm one of the 4 regular co-hosts of the show, and you might know me from my other syndicated Beatles radio program called Every Little Thing, being joined by 2 of my other regular co-hosts, one of which is the writer for Beatles Examiner, that being Steve Marinucci. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Ken, and hello, everyone.
And we also have with us one of the writers for Beatle Fan Magazine and a freelance writer and author of the recent ebook.
Got that something.
Got that something. What's the rest of the title, Allan?
Got that something. How the Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand changed everything.
Okay, Allan Kozin is here to join us. Hi, Allan.
Hello, Ken. Hello, Steve. Hello, everyone.
And unfortunately, one of our regular co-hosts, that being Al Sussman, writer for Beatle Fan Magazine, couldn't be with us. He's in the middle of, or finishing up, his move to Pittsburgh. So we wish him well in his new abode, and he will be joining us on our next show. All right. So on the show this time, we thought we'd talk about Ringo, and in particular, I think we were discussing the possibility of presenting an overview of his solo career and talk about in general what have been his great successes and also at the same time his failures. What have been the wrong moves that Ringo's made in a solo career, a combination of both. So I thought maybe I'd start the conversation by bringing at the very beginning of the music that Ringo put out. And back in 1970, he actually released 2 albums, one of which was an album of standards, Sentimental Journey, and the other one was an album of country music. And then that was followed by 2 big hits for Ringo that were just released as singles, It Don't Come Easy and then Back Off Boogaloo, followed by what became his biggest selling album of all time, the Ringo album of 73. But I just wanted to start the conversation by asking the 2 of you whether you thought that starting his career with those 2 albums and not doing what you might expect Ringo to do, a pop rock album, was that an interesting choice? Were they strong moves? Was it a wise move on Ringo's part to begin his solo career with those 2 albums? So why don't we start with Allan?
Okay. I think it was an interesting choice. That's a good way to put it. I think commercially it probably wasn't the best idea, or certainly Sentimental Journey wasn't. I think at the time, 1970, nobody in the sort of Beatles audience really wanted to hear that. I mean, the whole trend of rock stars doing the sort of great, they call it the Great American Songbook because I guess they're mostly American, but probably not entirely American. Just looking over actually the writer credits for Sentimental Journey, it really is, I guess, mostly American, if not all. But, there was not yet the trend towards recording that stuff, and Ringo was sort of out on his own, and it just seemed very, very eccentric. And also, as Ringo has put it, I'm not Pavarotti, nor is he Sinatra, and certainly not Ella. The thing that's interesting, though, is that I think now a lot of us who pretty much ignored that album when it came out look back at it now and say, wow, that was an interesting move, an interesting choice of songs. He had an all-star team of arrangers, which I think may have been lost on a lot of us who were, teenagers at the time, and didn't care that much about the music, or, I think actually people might enjoy it more now than they did then if they were to look back at it. And in a way, the same with Blue Hoops of Blues. He got an all-star cast of session players like Pete Drake on pedal steel, and I think as a Ringo album goes, that is a little closer to what you might have expected. I mean, after all he had sort of prepared us with Act Naturally and things like that. I mean, we always sort of knew that he had this interest in country music. And, and so this wasn't that much of a leap. And I thought at the time that album was a bit more interesting than Sentimental Journey. And now I think they're both okay. I mean, I don't see masses of people sort of rediscovering them, but it might be nice if they did. So yeah, it was a surprising move. I think it was an audacious move, actually. I don't think people necessarily think of Ringo as the audacious one, but ultimately we saw Paul sort of catching up with him with Kisses on the Bottom.
That's true. Many, many years later.
Yeah.
How about you, Steve? What did you think of Ringo starting his solo career with those two albums?
Well, first I think you have to go back to what he did with the Beatles, and some of the stuff he did was decidedly eclectic. I mean, if you want to call Act Naturally, Act Naturally is not the type of thing that you would have expected from, the general catalog of the Beatles, So Ringo kind of had made his own little niche with the Beatles, and then, when he started with Sentimental Journey, that was he was also kind of following what the other guys were doing with their own little, vanity projects. And, he said at the time that, that was the type of music his mother liked. And yeah, it was, the first thing I thought of was, Paul followed his lead, all those years later, with Kisses. But, I agree, Alan. This is not an album that people pay a lot of attention to, Sentimental Journey. Maybe people will now, but he's not doing any songs from it. But that would be interesting if he pulled out one of those songs for the All-Star Band, but that won't happen. Yeah. It'd be more likely he would pull out a Boku of Blue song. But even then, both of these are real niche albums that just kind of were under the radar, I think, at the time. I don't think anybody really paid that much attention to them, like some of the other vanity projects the Beatles did, So it's interesting if he had gone with something a little more commercial at the time, what would have happened, why he waited until 73. Well, we can probably guess why he waited until 73, because he probably wasn't in much shape to do anything at that point, But
was he in better shape in 73?
Good question. Probably not. Probably not. But
what did that comment mean?
Which, mine or Steve's?
Yours, Alan.
Well, I'm assuming that Steve means that he was still in what in PDQ box life was called the Souse period.
There we go.
Yeah, but that lasted until 1989, so I'm not sure whether in 1973 he was better or worse off than he was in 1970. Another interesting thing is that he seems not to have counted those two albums. I mean, if you just go by the one clue he gives, which is the title of Ringo the Fourth, that's the fourth of his albums starting with Ringo Goodnight Vienna.
Right.
Reviewer Ringo the Fourth. It's as it well. Wait, it really is Ringo the Sixth, isn't it? I mean, so he seems not to have counted those two himself, and I'm curious why, really.
Yeah, that is weird. That is weird. I never realized that, actually. That's
he often refers to the Ringo album as though it's his first. So. But I definitely think that there were interesting choices that he made. I don't think that he was consciously trying to make a statement so much with these albums, saying this is the direction I'm going to be going in. And like we said, Sentimental Journey was an album that he made to please his parents. But at the same time, if you followed the whole Beatles history, they were so influenced by everything. They loved that kind of music anyway, and it was a part of them whether they did it as a band or not. Even if you watch Magical Mystery Tour, and they're singing When the Red, Red Robin Goes Bob,
Right.
Bob, Bobbing Along. That's part of who they were. That's part of what they grew up on.
And even George did Hoagie Carmichael.
Right.
John never went down that. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. John never went down that road. It would have been interesting by now to see if he would have had he still been around. But John really didn't do that.
Yeah, when Paul released Kisses on the Bottom, he was mentioning a couple of songs that he cited that John really liked from the 30s or, very early on. He liked that kind of music.
Mm-hmm.
He just didn't want to give people that image that he did.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And actually,
So-
we've a couple of us have mentioned that Act Naturally sort of fits in with Bookhoops of Blues, but in a way, you could slot Good Night from the White Album onto Sentimental Journey, and it would be perfectly at home.
Good point.
Absolutely.
Good point. Excellent point.
You know.
And he also did the what was the tribute on the tribute to Harry Nilsson. That God, I'm trying to remember the name of the song.
You're not talking about Lay Down Your Arms
No.
with Stevie Nicks.
Didn't he do When You Wish Upon a Star?
That was on that Disney tribute.
That's
right.
Yeah.
The Hal
Right.
Willner.
Right. That's what I'm. Yeah,
Right.
that's what I'm thinking about. So, yeah, I mean the same. It's the same, all the same. And then actually, When You Wish Upon a Star is a very cool track. That's a wonderful track. I mean, his voice. The thing about Ringo's voice is that it's so. I guess the word you want to use is unique. It's not your typical. I mean, everybody knows that Ringo is not Frank Sinatra, as we were saying earlier, but it opens up the possibility of doing some very interesting material, and he did it early on. That may have been, those just may have been tests just to see, but he really could take some unusual songs, especially now, and have fun with them. I don't know that he will. It seems like he's rocking, and he's insisting on being a rock and roller now and enjoying that a little more. But boy, I mean, there are some interesting things he could do. But
Ringo takes a lot of knocks for not being considered a great singer, and even he himself has said it. He's not Pavarotti. But by the same token, for the music that he records, his voice is suitable for all that. And even for something like Sentimental Journey, those songs, those arrangements of them, didn't require that much of a vocal range. So for whatever it is that he's recording, his voice suits it very well.
Well, he doesn't.
And actually,
he doesn't go out of his. He sticks within. He knows his limits.
right.
So.
But I think that his voice works really well with those arrangements and that kind of music.
Mm-hmm.
And Sentimental Journey, I think for the most part, I think it was executed very well. It's just the public may not have been ready for that, especially as the first album to come from Ringo.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing with an all-country album. And in a way, when the Beatles did Act Naturally, that wasn't that big of a shocker, I think. The Beatles have always been eclectic since the very beginning, and maybe as we were seeing their catalog unfold in front of us as it was happening, we may not have thought that as it was happening. But, you listen to a lot of the music that preceded Act Naturally in the Beatles catalog. There's a lot of country and western in their music, especially on the Beatles for Sale album, for example. So, Act Naturally was certainly not a shocker to me that the Beatles would do something like that.
And actually, they didn't really expand. They stuck within his limitations pretty much. Actually, from what he had done during when he was with Rory Storm, because he did Boys then, correct? And he also didn't he do Act Naturally then, or am I thinking wrong? I know he did. I know he did Boys because on that album of the Rory Storm album, I think Boys is on there, but although he's not on that. That's right too.
But the Buck Owens version of Act Naturally was a hit in 1963. So Ringo had already left Rory by then. He was in the Beatles, so he couldn't have done the song then.
That's right. That's right. Okay.
But even a lot of the rockabilly, country and western stuff, What Goes On, to me, is in the same vein. So it's not that far removed from Act Naturally.
Yeah.
No.
But a lot of people, all these years later, have looked back now at Bookhoops of Blues, and they think that it was a really good album, a strong album, and wish that Ringo would continue doing more country music because, in part, it doesn't require as much of a vocal range, and his voice really suits country music very well. And I think that album really proves that. I don't like every single song on it, but there are some really good songs in particular. It was produced extremely well. The musicianship was fantastic. And when you listen to the CD, even though going back now to the 90s when that CD came out, it's bright and punchy and it was produced really well.
Yeah.
So I think they were two very good albums, but I think the public wasn't really prepared. I don't think they were prepared for a full Ringo album anyway.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah,
it's funny about Ringo's voice. I mean, you say what you want about it. I mean, it really has a certain personality and charm that, like when we were talking about Dark Horse a couple of weeks ago, or was it even last week, when I was talking about the sound George's music had was so typically, his thumbprint, and Ringo's voice is like that too. And there are a lot of worse voices out there, attached to people who have huge careers. So I don't know. I don't know why Ringo takes some of the knocks that he does as a vocalist. I mean, he's not a virtuoso vocalist, okay, but he can put over a song.
Not only that, but I think even though he doesn't try to stretch his vocals live these days, he knows what his limitations are and he works with them. You go back to some of the live recordings with the Beatles, sometimes when he sings Boys, I mean, his voice has a real edge to it. Even in Act Naturally, you're listening to the Shea Stadium performance, and I love that little bit of edginess, that roughness, so his voice, no, it wasn't the greatest voice in rock and roll, but within its limitations, he has a good singing voice. It's not a great singing voice. It shouldn't really be cut down, I think. He has his own style, like you said, Al. That's what you can say about the Beatles, all four of them. They have their own individual vocal sound, their own individual songwriting style. Yeah, they're just so unique, all four of them, in every aspect. But then we move on to It Don't Come Easy and Back Off Boogaloo, two huge hits. And actually, many people may not know this, but Back Off Boogaloo turned out to be the highest charting single for Ringo in the UK. Whereas here in America, Photograph was a #1 hit, as was You're 16. But those two singles, both produced by George Harrison, were huge hits here in the States. And It Don't Come Easy has certainly gone on to become a rock staple now. So moving on to those two singles, how do you look back at those now, guys? How about you, Allan?
Those are great tracks. They just are. I mean, they're Ringo in his element, and Back Off Boogaloo with that drum sound as well. You sort of get that side of Ringo too, and and we should probably also mention early 1970 as a flip side of It Don't Come Easy. I think, right? That has a little bit of that autobiographical thing that he is now, working to death on his last few albums. But, and it's interesting, he's talking about the others, and it was a very tense period, for all of them, and apparently including him. He was the one who got along with everybody.
Right.
But, I think there was some fisticuffs with Paul apparently over Ringo being the one sent to tell him that he shouldn't put out his album at the same time as Let It Be, and that didn't go well. So I think on his verse he says, when he comes to town, I hope he's going to play with me.
Right.
It's sort of an interesting footnote. I had a copy of, or still have, of an EMI session sheet for a song called 3 Nights in Moscow, which was always one of these titles that turned up on bootlegs, and no one knew quite what it was. But it's clear from the session sheet that it's a Ringo song, although John is involved and George, and it's there's a lot of ambiguity on this sheet. So one of the times I interviewed Ringo, I asked him, what about that? Is that an early version of early 1970 or what? And he said, you just read someone's book. And I said, no. And I opened up my file and said, I have the track sheet right here. And he looked at it and he said, I just don't know what that is. But It seems to me, I mean, it has to be early 1970 because it's, three nights and four nights in Moscow. It just seems like, about four different people. It just has to be. I can't imagine what else it is if it's not early 1970. But anyway.
I can't see Ringo coming up with that title for a song about the other three Beatles and his relationships with them.
Yeah, I know.
It just doesn't make sense. But I do think that there's very clever wordplay there in those lyrics. Like you were saying, that's just that one little change in the lyrics. Mm-hmm. And when he comes to town, I hope he's going to play with me, or as opposed to I know he's going to play with me.
Yeah.
So, and some people may not have picked up on that. But it's really clever.
Allan, did you say the dates of early 1970 and Three Nights in Moscow are pretty close?
I think they were. I should have had the track sheet out, but in fact, I don't even know where it is right now. But they were pretty close. But there were some anomalies that made it kind of still a mystery. So it's just one of those things that we've never completely got to the bottom of. But it sort of has to be that. What else could it be?
Interesting.
Ringo didn't know anyway.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
How about you, Steve? Those two songs.
Those are fantastic songs. I'm looking at my Billboard book here, and they both were top 10 hits, which they weren't his highest hits, because he also had two number ones. But the fact that and they were top 10 hits, one in 71, one in 72. So that's pretty good. I mean, it shows he was really kicking off. But I mean, those two songs are great, and even better when the demo. It was even better when the demo of "It Don't Come Easy" surfaced with George. That was amazing. I love hearing that. You don't hear that very often on any of the Beatles shows, but it's a great song.
Right.
Great version. But I remember being really excited when that showed up, when that first came out. But no, I love those two songs. I think "It Don't Come Easy" is probably the better of the two songs, but they're both great. I mean, he does them really, really well. So
it's always kind of interesting when you look back. There's certain songs in every artist's career that stand out as though they become classics and staples, and they still get regular airplay. And for whatever the reason, "It Don't Come Easy" is that song with Ringo, as well as "Photograph." But what is it specifically about "It Don't Come Easy"? What is the appeal of that song, do you think? Aside from the fact that I think it's a great song, and I love the recording, I love the production behind it. I love George's production and his guitar work in there. What is it specifically about that song? Because it's obviously so important. Ringo does it in every show. It must be a favorite of his. So can you pinpoint what you think is so great about that particular song, why that's a standout?
I think it fits his voice better than Boogaloo.
I'm not saying compared to Back Off Boogaloo. I mean, I'm saying in terms of his entire catalog.
Well, I think it's a song he sounds very good singing. Mm-hmm. I think that's really the bottom. I think that's probably one of the better reasons that you can come up with. That his voice sounds a lot more comfortable singing that song and he doesn't have to with Back Off Boogaloo with the drums and everything and the beat and everything. He has to sing a little louder and it almost like he has to compete with the music. Whereas with "It Don't Come Easy," he doesn't really have to compete with the music. What do you think, Allan?
Yeah, you may be right. I never really thought of them as one versus the other. I think he does pretty well on Back Off Boogaloo too, but I think "It Don't Come Easy" is, as you say, sort of a better song as a song. And I don't know, it's just that's a great combination of singer and song there, and it just clicks.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, since that demo showed up, that everybody, most fans know about that demo, and you hear that, and you kind of, I don't know if you hear that when you hear him singing it, but you're aware of it, and it's that much more, it's that much more significant that George also did it, I don't recall hearing any real alternate versions of Back Off Boogaloo. I mean, other than the live versions that he's done, but I mean, I don't think there are any outtakes of that floating around.
No.
Not that I've heard.
Right.
But Ringo has admitted that George helped him write it.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that Ringo explained it, I think Ringo said that Ringo, wrote 2 of the verses in the chorus, and George finished the rest of the song. But probably what happened in the studio was that George was going through a run-through with the musicians. And instead of having Ringo sing it as he's drumming, George would do it. But an interesting thing about that demo is that you got all the Hare Krishna background vocals in there, which obviously Ringo didn't want to keep. Mm-hmm. So, so maybe George was making a suggestion there. Obviously, that was, that would be his suggestion for that song, and Ringo didn't want it in there. But it's a terrific overall, not only great song, which Ringo was so comfortable singing, but the whole arrangement of it, like I said, the production. George, it's debatable. Maybe we should do a show on this, but of the other Beatles, which one do you think did the best work for Ringo? Because they all knew how to write for Ringo really well, but Ringo had more success with George, with his work, especially writing Photograph with him as well. So, Don't Come Easy. Back Off Boogaloo, I do love that drum sound.
Yeah.
Especially at the very beginning. That thick drum sound, it's just so wonderful. I wish there was more songs that had not just the drumming itself, but that sound. You don't really hear that really full, rich, thick drum sound on a lot of, Ringo's records. Especially, I love the production on his recent stuff. It's got a more high-end, bright, punchy sound to it. But whereas this one was, I don't know, just a very fat-sounding, thick-sounding drum sound, which I wish I heard more of it.
I think if you're talking about Beatle contributions, you have to also consider Lennon and I'm the Greatest. I remember when the demos of that came out. Those were freaking awesome. Those were great. That's something else I haven't heard in a while, but remember those, those are unforgettable when Lennon is singing that. And actually, you almost think Lennon sounds more natural with that song. And maybe Lennon originally had planned to do that song, and on a nice gesture on his part was to give it to Ringo. But he sounds great doing that song. He really does.
I think he wrote it for Ringo. Oh, yeah. I can't see him doing it. I mean, we hear the demos, of course, but I kind of think that if someone were able to ask him, did you intend to do that yourself, he would have said, hey, I already had enough trouble saying I'm bigger than Jesus. I'm not going to put out a record called I'm the Greatest. But right. Ringo, I think he would have felt that Ringo could do it, because I don't know. That's just my impression.
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right there about that whole thing about Jesus, but it's still, he does sound really good singing that song. Yeah. And so that particular demo also sounds really good. It's too bad there's not more, there really isn't a lot of Ringo things floating around. I mean, there've been there were the Chips Moman sessions. I remember those popping up. I mean,
there's different takes from the Ringo album.
I know, and they're not really different as I recall.
They're not. They're very slight.
Right, which is really, I mean, when you hear stuff like that, and you end up paying for it, and you go, wait a minute, this isn't even, this is not that way, not different. What's the point here? They took me for all this money, and this is what I got, but oh well.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I do think that the other 3 Beatles really wrote great material for Ringo.
Yeah.
So
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock is my absolute favorite of all the songs.
I mean, that's just a beautiful song. I'd like to hear Paul do that.
That would be wonderful. Wouldn't it be something if in concert Paul would just do a whole set of songs he wrote for other people? There are so many people that would love to hear him do A World Without Love, for example.
Yeah.
Recently, recently he did come and get it in Europe,
Hmm.
and we know he just redid it for this Hollywood Vampires project.
Hmm.
But yeah, so let's just move on to the Ringo album, which was by far the most successful of his albums. Just an amazing collection of songs. And I think in many ways, while so many people attribute the success of that album to the fact that the other three Beatles are on it, you have to take a look at the entire album, and all 10 tracks are wonderful, even the ones that didn't have any other Beatle involvement. So I do think that it was a tremendous album, and I think most of us are of the opinion that it is a great album, and for most people it's his best. But he came out all aces with this album.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Alan?
Yeah, I think so. And things like 6 o'clock really sort of put it over the top. Just looking at what else is on it.
Well, just for
Yeah,
Photograph alone, come on.
yeah, Photograph.
Photograph is such a tremendous song and recording.
Yeah. I mean, I could do without sun. I don't know if say do without Sunshine Life for me, but that one isn't that memorable to me as Photograph Year 16. Oh my, 6 o'clock. I mean, there's so much good stuff on it. It's just a great album, generally speaking, even if there are a few that are not as memorable as the others. I think it was a big surprise for everyone in a way, especially if you had sort of shrugged them off with Sentimental Journey and Bukupsa Blues. Having this album come out just seemed like, okay, maybe we have to pay attention to Ringo too,
Hmm. I have to also mention "Have You Seen My Baby" because it's Randy Newman.
Yeah.
Great writer, great song, and anyway, but yeah, I mean, it is a great album. I mean, I'm looking at the list of tracks here, and I'm just going, good grief, this is just. I mean, people would kill for an album with this many good tracks on it.
Yeah.
Richard Perry did a fantastic job with this. So.
Yeah, and You and Me, Babe is a tremendous song, and George was heavily involved with that. It was co-written with Mal Evans. It's a great album closer. Devil Woman, which he wrote with Vinnie Poncia, is a really good rocker. I think there's a lot of fans out there that wish he would do that live.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, 6 o'clock is a song of perfection. I mean, it's so tailor-made for Ringo. Paul really, he gave him his all with that song. And I do love Sunshine Life for me. It's a good hoedown song.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting, that's a song where the entire song is written in one chord,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't think is a very easy thing to do. But it's kind of interesting, and you can really hear George's background vocals in there too.
Mm-hmm.
And you should give a lot of credit to the other great musicians that played on this album, especially members of the band who are on there. Mark Bolan is on there. It's just, overall, Klaus Vormann, Billy Preston, great musicians throughout the entire album, which is something that became the norm
Yeah.
for most of Ringo's albums anyway.
Mhm.
But yeah, the Ringo album is just a total winner.
Maybe my impatience with Sunshine Life for me comes from listening to those bootlegs that Steve mentioned, because there are a gazillion supposedly different versions of that, which just I think are bare remixes, but are all the same. And
That's true. I forgot about those, but yeah, you're right. I mean, that particular song, I remember, sitting there listening to some of those things and just, they weren't a lot of fun. It reminds me of the Byrds put out a big box set of studio sessions, and a lot of that was the same thing, and it was really disappointing. Even though the quality was fantastic, there wasn't much to hear, and so it was the same with this Ringo stuff. But anyway.
All right, so let's just move on quickly to Goodnight Vienna, which was also a top 10 album. Richard Perry produced that one as well. In my opinion, it's got a lot of great material on there, but obviously it wasn't as strong as the Ringo album. I think we may fall into this trap of comparing everything to the Ringo album.
Yeah.
But it does have a lot of really good material, especially the title track. I love Ooh Wee, which is a song that he wrote with Vinnie Poncia. Has Dr. John on doing some really nice piano work. I love Snookeroo, which Elton John and Bernie Taupin gave to Ringo. All by Myself is a really good song. Another one. It's the start of the collaborations between Ringo and Goodnight Vienna with Vinnie Poncia, which I found to be very interesting. He was the first major songwriter to work with Ringo, and he did a lot of writing with Ringo throughout the 70s. I love the version of Easy for Me on there, the Harry Nilsson song, which again is kind of like in the Good Night vein with this heavy orchestration to back up Ringo's vocals, and it really suits him extremely well. And of course, you've got Only You on there, and the No No song, which I think was a surprise hit, a novelty record, but, you know, it's a fun track overall, catchy tune. You know, I think it was a very solid album. What do you guys think?
You know, when it came out, I really didn't like it. I'm not sure why I really didn't like it, but for some reason I just had a strong reaction against it. And looking at it now and hearing it now, I don't know why, but you know, I think it does have some great stuff. I mean, the title song is really pretty good, and you know, let's not forget the No No song, which kind of was ironic in a way, but you know, also seeing him do that on the Smothers Brothers, and it's kind of a good song for him, but just because it's kind of comic, you know. And I think it actually holds up better than I obviously had expected it to when it first came out. You know, again, I guess maybe it's the comparison with Ringo, but and in this case, you know, I think you can't help comparing it with Ringo because it's the album right before it, and it was so strong, and this just didn't seem quite the same, or you know, quite as strong. It seemed almost as if it was an album of, you know, the outtakes from Ringo or something like that. But I like it better now, I have to say.
I think that the one thing about it that you have to, you know, that you have to give it credit for is the composers that he used between Wade Axton, using Buck Graham, using Only You, for example, was I mean, that's not something you would have expected from Ringo. Goodnight Vienna is a great song. It really is. You know, and the rest of the album, you know, if you like you say, Allan, you're going to have, you know, it's going to get naturally compared to Ringo because it followed Ringo, but it didn't do badly in the charts. You know, trying to look at my.
It went to number 10 or number 9.
Number eight on
number 8. Okay.
On Billboard. So, and it had a 25-week run, which is pretty damn good. So, whereas Ringo had 37 weeks. Goodnight Vienna had 25, which is not bad, not bad at all. So it did really well, and I think forever we'll all have the image in our minds of Ringo in the flying saucer on top of the Capitol Tower.
Right.
But you know, it's a great, you know, it follows in the spirit of Ringo, so it's a good follow up.
The current CD version does have some help in that it gets Back Off Boogaloo and Blind Man and an extended version of 6 O'Clock as the bonus tracks.
Right.
So that helps, I think.
I don't think that Only You was that much of a shock that Ringo covered that. I think that Ringo began a pattern of having a cover version, doing some oldie on all of his albums. And so Only You was a song that John suggested that Ringo cover, and the way that it was delivered with that more acoustic arrangement really fit him well. So the fact that it was a top 10 hit in the States, you know, I could just see so many of the other songs that Ringo covered later on to have similar success, but that was not to be. And that's where we'll lead next, because Ringo's Rotogravure was the album that followed, and that was in 1976. It's going to be tough to go in detail through every single Ringo album here in just an hour, but this was the start of a real dive for Ringo as far as his record sales are concerned, and I'm kind of baffled by that, because even though I look at the late 70s Ringo stuff from Ringo's Rotogravure, Ringo the Fourth, and Bad Boy as being, I don't consider them bad albums at all. I think that they're good. They're okay. They all had some good songs. But it's not as if you listen to Ringo's Rotogravure and say that was so much worse than Goodnight Vienna.
No.
I don't think that the quality necessarily went down. It's just for some reason, all of a sudden, and this carried on throughout the rest of his solo career, he could not pick up steam again. It didn't matter whether the material was good. And he continued, for the most part, with having the same kind of formula of having a lot of his friends, superstar friends, on his albums, and in many cases, the other Beatles. But that didn't seem to matter. Although the Bad Boy album was a departure in a way because he didn't have a superstar lineup on the songs on Bad Boy, for the songs on that. But, what made this why was there this tailspin all of a sudden with Ringo's career where it just seemed like the public suddenly just quickly lost interest in him? Alan?
It may have been something that, this is off the top of my head, so I could be wrong, and you will probably be able to counter what I'm saying very easily. But it seems to me that we're talking about the mid to late 70s, and I think all of the Beatles were sort of suffering from the fact that music was going in a completely different direction. People were not wanting to continue carrying the 60s superstars as, royalty. I mean, John sort of wasn't doing very much anyway by the late 70s. He had that 5 years off. Paul in the late 70s, he was actually doing okay.
He was doing really well.
Yeah, he was. Although, after 76, I think those things were less in the public eye than the early up to, say, Wings Over America. And I don't know, just something about I'm really not sure why, because I'm looking at these track lists and there are songs on all of those albums that I think are fun and that I like, and you can't say that Ringo didn't promote them. He made video clips for most of his singles, and then for around the time of Bad Boy, I guess he did that TV special, which, wasn't amazing, but it was kind of fun. I don't know if you've watched the outtakes. The outtakes are excruciating, but the show, the show itself, with Art Carney and Carrie Fisher, and it was, it wasn't much, but it was fun, and he sang the songs. George was in it too, that press conference that they had in the show, and I don't know why these things were such failures, but you can't say that he wasn't out there trying to put them over, and maybe he wasn't performing live, and maybe that was it. I don't know.
You realize,
but he wasn't performing live up till then anyway.
Well, it's true. Yeah, it's true. So that would apply to the Ringo album as well, but I don't know.
You realize having Art Carney and Carrie Fisher in that special gives him a link to the Star Wars holiday special.
Okay.
But anyway,
that's an extreme form of trivia that we're featuring here on the show.
In any event,
maybe there's also a little bit of his, his drinking problems were becoming a little more public. I mean, wasn't it around the time he was doing these that he went on John Davidson completely crocked? Did some of those public interviews, like not in the best shape. Though, frankly, I don't think people don't buy records because the person who made them gets drunk. I think those are two separate things. And,
if that's the case, you'd have had a lot of people's records
not selling records.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And that didn't happen. So
in so many cases, and I can apply this to the other Beatles and what records they released at a certain time, but you could have taken any Ringo album that followed the Ringo album, and instead of it being Goodnight Vienna, it was Ringo's Rotogravure, it was Stop and Smell the Roses, it was Time Takes Time, which I think is one of his best. And if those albums had come out in 1974, they would have been just as successful as Goodnight Vienna. It's not like there's that big a difference in the quality of the music, the way that I see it, because they all had good songs. They all had singles that could have gone somewhere, but for some reason, radio decided not to play them. Although a Dose of Rock and Roll did make the top 40, it went to number 26. Yeah. And I thought that song could have done much better than it did. So I just don't really understand when it comes to this real dive in Ringo's career, what was the difference in the quality of the music?
I guess what I was trying to say is that the rest of the world was sort of hurtling towards disco in those days, and a guy coming out and singing songs as he has always come out and sung songs probably was less interesting to radio. He was singing in that style that people from the 60s did, actual songs.
Right.
Ridiculous disco beat.
Let's not get into a big argument over disco, because I happen to like disco. But
no.
Yes, it's I was not someone who went to Studio 54, but I did like a lot of the crossover stuff that was on the pop charts. And Saturday Night Fever was the album that dominated the album charts when London Town came out, which is why it didn't make number one, but it still made number two. So I think that Paul was not really suffering the rest of the 70s, although Back to the Egg did it only made like number 8 on the charts. So but that could also be because Goodnight Tonight was not on there. So I don't think Paul was suffering. I don't think there were a lot of rock stars that tried to adapt to the changes and put out their own dance records or disco records, like the Rolling Stones, which we mentioned, like Rod Stewart with Do You Think I'm Sexy, something like that. But at the same time, there was still pop stuff that was selling really well. You didn't have to, you had a group like the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac, and they didn't have to rely on disco. You had people who put out pop and rock, and they did fine. So Ringo still put out, more of the same stuff. I think when he released Drowning in the Sea of Love, which was kind of like a dance track, kind of in the disco style, that was him trying to fit in there. And I don't think that particular arrangement worked for him.
Yeah.
But at the same time, most of his albums had songs that you could say, wow, that's a single. If the No-No song could be a hit, then certainly Heart on My Sleeve from Bad Boy could have been a hit.
Yeah.
That was a great song.
I like
to
that
me.
song.
Yeah. It's one of my favorites of all of Ringo's solo songs, and I think that really suited his style and his persona. And, there's a lot of songs on the Bad Boy album that I could have seen as singles that could have worked just as well as the hits that he had in 73 and 74. So I just fail to see what the difference is in the quality and why suddenly it just completely changed. Was Ringo looked upon as being more of a novelty? The Beatle that you wouldn't expect to have hits, but he did. Maybe he relied too much on his friendship with the other Beatles or other people. Is that what carried him over with those hits? Or is it really because of the fact that those hits were strong songs, which is what I believe, ultimately. But maybe the public's perception of him was different. Because, he has never gotten that much respect overall, maybe in recent years, especially since we're noticing that, the public might be noticing more what a great drummer he is and what his contribution was in the Beatles. But, he was always looked upon as being one of the luckiest musicians on the face of the earth, and maybe that carried over into why his records didn't sell after Goodnight Vienna and why radio basically refused to play him.
Okay.
Do you have any ideas about that?
No, you're probably right. We should probably head on to Stop and Smell the Roses, which I believe didn't I pick that as my Ringo album that I would possibly take to a desert island? I remember you guys being shocked at whatever my choice was, and I think that might have been it.
Okay.
Those next two, Stop and Smell the Roses and Old Wave, he could hardly get those things released.
Right.
I think Old Wave was released in Canada and Germany initially, and that was it.
Right.
So, and again, they're really not bad. I mean, I like Rack My Brain. He did a remake of Back Off Boogaloo.
It was really like a medley where he worked in Beatles songs.
And Stop and Take
the titles of Beatles songs.
Yeah, Stop and Take the Time to Smell the Roses, I thought was a nice track, and they had a good video for it. And, I don't know. I think, wasn't that album also, he was working on that when John was shot, and he sort of put it aside because John had sent some songs for it, like Life Begins at 40. And it
was going to be called Can't Fight Lightning originally.
Yeah.
And John was going to give him Life Begins at 40, and apparently Nobody Told Me was going to be given to Ringo.
Yeah. And it's got Drumming Is My Madness and
Yeah.
Rack My
Mm-hmm.
Brain,
And
Attention. He made a series of videos with Paul and Linda for some of these, like a little sort of short film that had a few of the
yeah,
songs in it.
the Cooler, it
Yeah,
was called.
yeah, that's right. So I don't know. Again, we could say for some of these albums the same thing we've been saying for the last few. Why didn't anybody pay attention? I don't know.
Well, I think probably a good reason would be the label. I think they had it buried on. I mean, it just didn't get distributed as well as it should have, and I think that's probably a good reason for it. And then when Capitol reissued it, they put it on the right stuff, which is really kind of silly because who's going to know about it then? At least they put it out again though. So, but it's just yeah, the distribution I think was a lot of the problem with that album. So I know it was with Old Wave, like you said,
Yeah.
Alan, because it didn't get released here for a long time. In fact, I believe it showed up on bootleg before it came out here, which which is not surprising. So I mean, that's criminal almost that they didn't put it out here. It's really silly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I remember seeing it as an import. I used to work at a record store at the time, and that was the only way to get it then.
mhm.
But yeah, those two albums are really very strong albums too. I agree with you a lot, Alan, about Stop and Smell the Roses, because not only are there the songs that you mentioned, I think Paul's work with Ringo on that album is extraordinary.
Hmm.
Attention is a great, catchy song, and Private Property, I think, was a really good leadoff track. And a lot of people point to Sure to Fall as a favorite because it takes you back to the Beatles
Right.
recording that song, and another one in the country vein, the Carl Perkins song.
Right.
And apart from that, he works so well with Harry Nilsson. Stop and Take the Time to Smell the Roses and Drumming Is My Madness are both kind of like novelty-esque, same way that the No No song was.
Mhm.
And I do like especially some of the songs that people overlook on that album because Nice Way, which was partly written by Stephen Stills, was a really good song. And Ringo co-wrote a song with Ron Wood on there called Dead Giveaway, which I thought was pretty good.
Mhm.
So, and I also think that with Old Wave, and it's not because Joe Walsh is his brother-in-law, I think I just think the two of them work so well together. They fit rather nicely stylistically
Yeah.
in terms of the songwriting and in terms of Joe Walsh's guitar work. I just think that I love the songs that Ringo writes with Joe Walsh. And it started with that album.
That's right.
So go back to that one.
Right.
And Joe Walsh has co-written, a song here and there on Ringo's more recent albums.
Yep.
And, it's a really good, the two of them are just a good pair, Ringo with Joe Walsh.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, he wasn't
All
his
right, so-
brother-in-law at the time. But
No.
I know. But since it seems like we're just going through the discography, let's go to Time Takes Time, 1992.
Which was really his renaissance. It was his it really revived him.
Yeah.
Revived his career a lot. It really did. It was a great album, and I think it surprised everybody because nobody was expecting anything. And it started off with Way to the World and Don't Go Where the Road Don't Go. Even now sounds fantastic, and he's done that. I think I heard him do that once live. He hasn't done it very often, but he did do it live at one of the shows I went to, and it's fantastic. So
That's a great live song, and he's done it on several of his tours, but yeah, he hasn't done that one for a long time now.
yeah,
But, when he started his All-Star Band tours, he did that one on the first few,
Right.
and he brought it back later. I think he's very proud of that particular song.
Yeah. Well, that was, his message at the time. I mean, we should point out, everyone probably knows it, but that Time Takes Time was really the first thing he did after getting sober, and he was almost not militant about it, or not even the way Paul is about not eating meat, but he was sort of on message there. I mean, he said in his interviews, I had this problem, I took care of it, and Don't Go Where the Road Don't Go is sort of what that's about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there were other things too, and he was trying to deal with topical things like runaways, and he'd be sort of like John in the old days, inspired by something he saw in the news, But yeah, a lot of good stuff on that album, and it's well played and it's well sung. And I think, Steve's right. It was sort of a rebirth for him, and he also had a story to sell too about, getting sober and everything,
Right.
and going out on the road. So, he sort of had it all at that point.
Yeah, I really think that Time Takes Time was such a turning point in Ringo's career, because ever since that album's come out, I really have sensed that Ringo puts full effort behind all of his albums.
Mm-hmm.
You might think that some of his late 70s stuff, although as I said, I think that they're good, solid albums, you might think that, there might be a song here and there that wasn't that strong. Maybe he didn't give it his all.
Yeah.
Maybe he was just doing it because, well, I got to make another album. This is my album for next year. But I think that with every album that he's released from Time Takes Time on, he's really put the effort in.
Yeah, I think
it shows. Yeah,
I think that's a great point. I think that's true. I think you really can hear the difference between those '70s albums and Time Takes Time a lot. There's quite a change there. Quite a
the thing about
Go ahead.
with Time Takes Time, kind of like the Ringo album, which had 10 songs, and Time Takes Time also has 10 songs. It's another album that I think is a perfect album because I love every song on it. And despite the fact that you have 4 different producers on there, with the exception of Jeff Lynne, who has such a really distinctive production style, you really can't tell whether it's Don Was, who produced the track, or Peter Asher, who produced it, or Phil Ramone, and there's a real consistency throughout. There's so many songs on there that, had it been 1974, the follow-up to Ringo, could have been big hits. And I often point to In a Heartbeat as being one of the greatest singles that never were, because it's really a tremendous song, which was written by Diane Warren, who's one of the most successful female songwriters from like the 90s on up. Mm-hmm. And just a tremendous song that would have made a great pop hit in the 70s for Ringo. I just don't see, if that was the follow-up to Photograph, that would have been a #1 single. Just like Your 16 was. And just, every song on there is a winner. Weight of the World is one of the best songs he's ever done, I think, in his solo career. It's just so tailor-made for him, and I love the guitar sound. It's very 60s-ish, and you can tell that with a song like I Don't Believe You, that was definitely made to capture the 65 Ringo sound. So every song on there is a winner, and I definitely consider it like in my top 3 of Ringo albums. So
and you get an obscure B-side as well that's worth getting, which is his version of "Don't Be Cruel." It was on the back of "Weight of the World,"
which is fun to listen to
because it was probably a CD single, but
we've actually come up to an hour now already. And we've gone through like half of his catalog, and we haven't talked about the rest of his career, the movies.
I was going to say we should at least have a brief mention of Vertical Man, which really, on top of the success of Time Takes Time, really made everything blossom even that much better, and really cemented, what laid the foundation for what he's doing now and how good things are now. We can stop there, but I think that should be mentioned, is that a lot of people look at Vertical Man now as really such an incredible. I think there are some people that actually compare Vertical Man with Ringo in terms of how good those 2 albums are, and they really are. They really are great. They both are. At least I think so. You guys think?
Well, I look at the Mark Hudson period, those first 3 albums, Vertical Man, Ringo Rama, and Choose Love, as being all pretty equal. I think they're all solid albums, and I think that, whereas Vinnie Poncia was the big songwriting partner for Ringo in the 70s, and Ringo did a little bit of songwriting here and there with other people, especially with Joe Walsh, Mark Hudson became his guy, really. Once Vertical Man, once they started working on that, and then the albums that followed, and also Liverpool 8, and the Christmas album, I Want to Be Santa Claus, which was an amazing album to me. But I think that, the collaboration between Ringo and Mark Hudson, that really got him interested even more in the songwriting aspect, to the point where just about every single song on his albums now he co-writes. So that's a whole other world now of Ringo, where he did it before, but not to this level, where just about every single song is a co-write, which is part of, one of the great successes of Ringo's solo career. He got to songwriting kind of late. He blossomed kind of late, but he got there. And it took all these other people to get him there. And I think the combination of Ringo and Mark Hudson was one of the best things that ever happened in his career. And also the other people in the Roundheads that work with him, like Gary Burr and Steve Dudas. And, those songs the songs on those albums. I won't say that with Liverpool 8 because that's not as consistently strong as the others, but there are some good songs on Liverpool 8. But, that collaboration, having those people to work with on those albums in a row, it began to feel like more of a band effort, even though they had other musicians helping out besides the Roundheads, but it felt more and more like a band, and I think Ringo was getting into a really good groove with those musicians on every level, in terms of the songs that were put on those albums, his songwriting, the production behind it, and really making a concerted effort that just about every single song on those albums were really strong and very interesting.
If there's one thing that I think he should do, that I think everybody wishes he would do, is to go back to a Ringo and the Roundheads kind of format or issue, or band, or bring back Ringo and the Roundheads at least once, because I think that was a great period, and I don't know whether it's whether he just doesn't feel like he wants to at his age at 75 want to take that much of a spotlight, but it was that Ringo and the Roundheads tour was fantastic, and it's too bad that we can't have that anymore, because that was a lot of fun. He takes a lot of the spotlight with the All-Star Band, of course. He has to, but it'd be sure nice to have Ringo and the Roundheads again, because that was really, although everybody says all the All-Stars are a band, the Roundheads were a band, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you say that, though, Steve, because when Postcards from Paradise came out, and you were saying you kind of prefer Ringo's album since the Roundheads, you like his production more, moving away from Mark Hudson.
You got a hell of a memory here. Jeez. You're going to use this. You're going to use this for me. Use this against me now. But I'm just saying. I think the Ringo and the Roundheads. I'm not the only one that feels like that. I remember hearing a lot of comments about Ringo and the Roundheads, and people were saying they partially because those shows were all Ringo. So he wasn't giving off the spotlight to somebody else every 2 minutes. Those shows were all Ringo, and I think that's one thing. And so he was forced to do a whole set list of his songs. And I think that's part of the motivation for saying that.
So what you're really saying, to clarify, is that you kind of wish that Ringo would do shows, live performances with the Roundheads, as opposed to making new albums, studio albums.
Yeah, okay. I'll go with that. But sure, I think another depending on the band too. I don't know who he would pick up at this point in time. I can imagine that just about anybody would be glad to work with him. But I think it'd be nice to have an alternate band. I've also often wanted him to do drum projects. And one of the, and I've said this before, one of the high points of the exhibit at the Grammy Museum in LA was him giving drumming lessons, because it was great, because you saw his technique right naked, and I wish he would do kind of like what Bill Kreutzmann has done with the Dead, where he's done these solo vanity projects. I wish he would kind of do something like that. Closest thing I think he's done was that video lesson, the Indian drumming lesson with, I can't remember her name now, where she was teaching him how to play the tabla, and that was just fantastic to watch him pick that up. And I would love to be able to see more of him drumming like that.
Hmm.
I think everybody would.
Okay. Alan, any final comments about what we've been talking about?
No, I agree with what you guys are saying, and it's a pity we aren't getting to the second half of the discography. Although we did a whole show on his most recent album. So I also went through a period of wishing that he would tour with the Roundheads and do full shows as the front man, and I think I might have suggested that once in a review of, I'm not sure what, maybe it was Choose Love or something. And it was when David Fishoff was still managing him, and he did a concert at the Bottom Line in New York.
Right.
And I was there. David Fishoff came up to me and said, so Ringo read your review. And I said, oh, really? And what did he say? And he said, he wants me to go on tour with these Roundhead guys. Tell them to forget it. So yeah, I just felt that. I like the All Stars, but I thought with the Roundheads, it was, guys you're working with on the records, guys you're working with who are, just a tighter, we're in it to be your band ensemble. And I also, I was lucky to get to see the Roundheads several times. I guess all at the Bottom Line, small venues. And, those were good shows. I think he just didn't want to be the front man for a whole show. Those were also short shows.
Right.
But, I kind of wish he had. But, the All-Star format is pretty good too. We didn't actually touch on that. And if we had, I would probably observe that at this point he's probably putting out way too many live records. Almost every time the All-Stars go out, except recently, just looking through the discography here, there's like so many All-Star Band records, and his parts of them are largely the same. There's always going to be Little Help from My Friends and Yellow Submarine and Don't Come Easy. And so that gets a little bit repetitive, especially if, like me, you feel compelled to buy everything that they do. So, yeah, I guess I wish he would do studio things more frequently and live albums less frequently. But actually, looking at it now, we got 2 studio albums in a row, 2012 and Postcards from Paradise, and then before that was Live at the Greek Theater. And then before that, 2 studio albums, and before that, Soundstage, and then before that, Ringo and the All-Star Band. So maybe I'm complaining to no purpose. It used to be, though. It used to be in the 60s, you'd have a group that would put out 12 albums and one of them would be a live album, And now it's okay, having 2 studio albums in a row and then a live album, well, it's better than the Rolling Stones are doing. The Rolling Stones are all live or compilations. So, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how to look at the whole live aspect as far as the CDs that have come out and DVDs. To me, Ringo in concert with the All-Stars is an event, and it's more to watch.
Right.
As well, and I love the music itself, obviously. And in so many cases, if you put on a live CD from tour number 2 versus tour number 6, you're not going to be able to tell which version of It Don't Come Easy it is that you're hearing. That they're all kind of the same. The only difference is what the other All-Star musicians are, and which ones are in each band, and the material that they're doing. And yes, Ringo's material has changed somewhat from tour to tour. He still does the staples all the time, but I do think that the DVDs that have come out are wonderful. And that's something that I spend more time as far as his live performances, watching the DVDs as opposed to listening to the CDs. But who knows? It's nice to have a document of everything.
Yeah.
Someday when they're all no longer with us, it's nice to have something to represent each tour. And actually, he hasn't put out something for every tour.
Right.
But it's nice that he has put out quite a lot.
And I guess so long as I'm getting the bootlegs anyway, the least I could do is buy one of his official ones for each tour.
There is that 1989 video, which apparently has been picked up by a lot of overseas distributors that you can pick up for maybe about $10 on Amazon. That is well worth. I mean, that's the first tour, and that's well worth grabbing if you don't have it. I think he still had the ponytail at the time, which looking back on those days he looked horrible in that thing, but the music was great. No question about it. So.
Well, when you watch DVDs of these tours, or even if you want to go on YouTube and watch any of this stuff, it's amazing the talent that he's had in the last 26 years. All the amazing people that have been in his bands, and it's just it's fascinating to watch all this stuff and to look at these people through the years, and especially when they were younger, many of whom are no longer with us.
Right.
And I look at these tours as being very historic. Different combinations of various people and interesting combinations at times. Most of the time, I still point to that tour that had Roger Hodgson and Sheila E. and Ian Hunter and Howard Jones and, thinking to myself, how could this ever work? And it's amazing, how everything just seems to gel, going from In the Court of the Crimson King to The Glamorous Life from Sheila E.
Right.
And it's wonderful. And it's just an amazing thing, the range of music that it's presented in all these tours. And I'm so grateful that Ringo's done so many of them and still continues to. But yeah, I would like to see something similar to a Roundheads tour. I always wanted to see that. He never did a tour with them, but he did play some sporadic shows, and one of them that I got to see was at Irving Plaza in New York City. And the thing about those shows, like you were saying, Allan, they're much shorter. They were like an hour and 10 minutes. And they were basically the same songs that he does with the All-Stars with a couple of other songs that he threw in. It's not like he really reached deep into his catalog and pulled out a lot of stuff that he would only do with the Roundheads. So I'd love to see like something close to a 2-hour show that would be basically all Ringo songs and go deeper into his catalog. He's done just about all. He's done every Beatles song except Goodnight. So, as far as solo material, it's endless what he could do.
Right.
And I'd love to see him do that and show pride in his solo catalog. And but he loves the whole aspect of the All-Stars. It puts him in a comfort zone. He loves drumming behind all these different people that he admires. He doesn't just want to be up front singing. And he can't drum and sing on every single song throughout an entire show. So I think that it's a much safer presentation for Ringo to have all these other stars because, some of the fans who go out there go to see the other people just as much as they go to see Ringo. Many of them go to see mainly Ringo, but some of them go to see the others too. So it's a great concept. It's a formula that has worked all these years and still continues to work. So I'm glad he's still doing it.
Yeah.
But at some point, we really should, revisit, the rest of Ringo's solo career because we could go deeper from, say, Vertical Man on, and also talk about his movies too, if you want to go that far.
Oh, sure.
Well,
or do one show on his movies. So
just tell
let's
everybody,
not talk about the movies now.
Right. I was going to say, let's just tell everybody to demand that we do it. Everybody out there listening, just send us an email to thingswesaidtodayradioshow@gmail.com and demand we talk more about Ringo.
And I'm sure that we're going to get a flood of emails from people saying that Sextet deserves one full show. So when that happens,
and Candy,
you'll all know about it.
That's actually we should do a Ringo movie show. We really should, because besides that particular movie, I mean, he's done the movies are in a class by themselves. They really are, So there we go.
All right. So, anybody want to add anything at all or plug anything?
Well, let me just mention, since it was announced today that Ringo's doing a live on-stage interview for those of you in the LA area on the 25th at the El Rey Theater. 25th of September at the El Rey Theater in Los Angeles. It was just announced this morning. The tickets are on sale through AXS.com, and I don't know how much they are. And I'm told, somebody asked me this morning whether or not the event would be streamed. There are no plans to stream it now, but that is an open question. It's not been decided it could happen. So anyway, there you go.
And you should say this is being done to promote his new book.
Right.
Called Photograph.
We also were going to get into. We were also going to talk about the books, but we ended up talking about the albums and didn't get that far. But yeah, they're reissuing the Photograph book. Actually, they're issuing it for the third time, because the first time it was out as an ebook. Then they put the signed book, and now this is the book without the Genesis. This is the Undeluxe Genesis version, because Genesis I believe is doing it.
Yeah, this is mass market.
Right.
So anybody can buy it. So kind of like when I Me Mine came out as a book in mass market, this is sort of the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. So there we go.
All right. This has been fun talking about Ringo, quite a lot of his discography here, and we'll hopefully finish the rest of it at some point in the future and talk about other aspects of Ringo's solo career, like his movies. So, on behalf of Steve Marinucci, Allan Kozin, in absentia, Al Sussman, and myself, Ken Michaels, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.